All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I am so excited to be here with a couple of, I'll say cloud storage gurus. This is Darren from Komprise. I've got Paul and Karl. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves and then we'll jump right in. Paul, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Darren. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Chen. I'm Senior Director of Product Management for Komprise, and I'm based in our Bay Area headquarters.
Great. Hi, everybody. Karl Rautenstrauch. I'm a Principal Product Manager with Azure Storage and thrilled to be here today.
Awesome. Well, we're thrilled to have you, Karl. It's great partnership, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. So let's jump right in. The session is focused on migration, data migration, cloud file migration, how to do it effectively. I do want to give a quick housekeeping for some of you who might be newer to the BrightTalk interface. There are some tips here. You can enter full screen by using the arrows to get a bigger picture. And we do want to encourage you to ask questions. So we want to make this as interactive as we can. We have a poll question in here as well, but let's go. So the agenda, we're going to have Karl introduce us to this fantastic program that Microsoft's kicked off. And Karl's really, I think you've been kind of the driving force called the Azure File Migration Program. Talk about that. We're going to talk about the partnership with Komprise and we spend a lot of time in the demo. So Paul is who runs product management at Komprise. He's going to be showing you what we call Hypertransfer and how to really accelerate. We've actually run some performance testing, 25 times faster SMB migration performance with Hypertransfer for our elastic data migration. So that's the agenda. Let's jump right in. Karl, do you want to tell us about the Azure File Migration Program?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the things that I've been involved with in my 10-year career here at Microsoft that honestly I'm most proud of. My past, my lineage is as a storage administrator. So I managed SAN and NAS environments in a couple of really large enterprise customer accounts here in the state of Florida, and have lived through the pain, the suffering, the trials, and the tribulations of attempting to move large volumes of data. And what we're seeing is this is increasingly a focus for our customers as they attempt to take advantage of the on-demand compute capabilities in public cloud. So when you think about a few examples of where you may be able to really benefit from paying for what you use only when you need it, these four types of workloads are perfect examples. High performance compute jobs, you typically need to run those only briefly during a month. And then when you're done, those compute nodes, if they're in your own data centers, are just sitting there idle. They're not doing anything. So cloud is a great way to use our resources for that batch-like or bursty nature of HPC, and then save a lot of money by shutting those machines down when you're not running jobs. The same with analytics workloads, virtual desktops, of course, remote work, we're all seeing that. And then even traditional applications can benefit from the up, burst down nature of cloud compute. What each one of these has is a large unstructured data set that goes along with it that is what that compute engine is processing against. And historically, moving that type of data, unstructured data in a file, NAS environment, SMB share, NFS export, or object storage environment to public cloud has been a real challenge. Scripted, manual, labor intensive, a really, really painful process. So I wanted to fix that for our customers. And I needed to make sure that we were engaging partners who had great solutions that made the process drastically easier by paying attention to these key attributes. Automation goes without saying. You want to set and forget. Configure your job, let it run in the background, and not have to worry about or babysit it. We're going to talk a lot about performance on this webcast. Komprise has done a phenomenal job of making these copy activities occur as fast as possible. So if you want to fill your pipe, your network pipe, you can do that with Komprise. And you also need to make sure at that same time that you can control the bandwidth. So during working hours, you can limit the utilization a little bit, and then off hours, increase that bandwidth utilization. And of course, having a chain of custody capability, being able to track and prove to auditors that this content moved, it was never outside of our control, and all of the permissions, all of the security-oriented permissions and ACLs were preserved, is critically important. So that really led to our partnership with Komprise, because Elastic Data Migration enables each and every one of these and much, much more that we're going to talk about here as we go forward. So this really is a simple program to take advantage of. It is as simple as clicking a button in the Azure Marketplace or reaching out to azure@komprise.com, and you can get started. There are no forms to fill out. There's no complexities. There's no mother may I to take advantage of this program when it makes sense for you to do so. And that is what I want to talk about here on my last slide before I hand things back over. And that is, where does it make sense to engage and to take advantage of Komprise Elastic Data Migration capabilities? Well, I've got a few examples here, and I'm not going to read through all of these. This is something you can obviously do while I'm talking. But really the way to think of this is, if you have large amounts of data, 50 terabytes or more, on an enterprise NAS platform or on an S3 compliant object platform, and that can be NAS or S3 in a cloud or on premises, you can use these tools or this tool to move the data to Azure non-disruptively and in the background. You want to think about moving the applications that are using that data along with the data. Having compute in one location, data in another, not the greatest idea. And this is an exceptional way to move data over the wire. Really, this is not something for moving your backups to public cloud. Use your backup vendor to do that. You can absolutely use the tools to migrate less than 50 terabytes, but we don't really advise that because there is a very, very small learning curve, and the requirement to set up some infrastructure, the copy engines that will be doing this work. So if you have small amounts of data, it's probably better for you to use another tool like AZ Copy, RoboCopy, or rsync. And then Komprise works really, really well with unstructured data. We do have many customers, and I, as a former NetApp employee, had many customers who would run structured data, databases like Oracle databases or SQL, SAP, or virtual machines, VMDKs, on their NAS. And enterprise NAS is a great way to support those types of workloads. But due to the nature of that data and the way the copy utility works here, you're better off using other tools for that type of data. So I think the do's and don'ts are important to cover. I want to make sure everyone clearly understands what this is used for, and you can join the many, many happy customers who have taken advantage of Komprise's incredible capabilities if you are looking to perform the type of work that you see in the yes column. Awesome. So Darren, Paul, again, can't thank you guys enough. Really happy to be part of this today. And thanks for giving me a few minutes to talk about the migration program.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been a great program. And I want to bring you in for a couple of questions here, actually, in a second, because I'm sure it wasn't easy to get this off the ground, free. What are you talking about? There must have been, interesting internally as you proposed or, move that forward. But I do want to quickly introduce Komprise and then talk about how it's going, because it's been really incredible. We're 1 year into the program. So first of all, for folks on the call today who aren't familiar with Komprise, we are an unstructured data management platform. So our goal is to not only help you migrate data to the right destination, but to also help you manage that data throughout its life cycle. So there's many different use cases that we enable. From really everything is, for us, and you'll see in the demonstration, analytics first. So making sure you see everything and can actually make the right investment decisions. And then we help you mobilize the data. It could be through migration or tiering. replication, and then ultimately deliver that data to the right destination, as well as end users and interfaces and applications. So today we're going to focus really on the data migration use case, but I think it's important to let you all know, if you're new to Komprise, we are a broader platform that addresses many use cases for unstructured data management. But Karl, I want to just ask everybody on the call today. There's been some questions coming in, but I'd love to just get a sense of who's out there. Where are you on your migration journey? So I'm just going to go to this poll here and start it. It'd be just helpful for us to understand where you are. Are you 1 to 3 months in? Are you not yet, but within 6 months, maybe within a year? Not likely. We'd love to just get a sense for your file migration status or plans, because I do feel like we're still in early days of file migrations. I'd love to get your sense of that, Karl. Like, so 1 year into the program, any learnings and any observations just on kind of where we are in general around file migration?
Yeah, I would agree 100%, Darren. I think what we've been fighting for years now in public cloud is inertia. It is historically very, very difficult to move large volumes of file data between different systems, between heterogeneous systems. So, typically what I think you find is if a customer is using a vendor's enterprise NAS platform, they will replace that with the next generation of that platform because it's easier to migrate. You're able to use those onboard tools and migrate without having to worry about preserving permissions and those types of things. And really, Komprise has flipped the script on that. I mean, not only from a raw power and performance perspective, but from that ease of use perspective and making sure that everything stays in place. ACLs aren't lost, share permissions are preserved. Those types of things make it now possible to migrate from one platform to another, on premises to cloud, for example. So we're seeing much more rapid adoption here in the last year than we were historically.
That's great. Well, let's keep the poll open. Mixes, right? We're seeing quite a few yeses, some not yet but within the next 6 months. And then we're seeing some that, maybe within a year. So we'll keep it open for a minute. To your point, before we dive into Komprise and Hypertransfer and show you all this live in real time, I do want to just emphasize that momentum point. We're already being run by over 100 Microsoft customers. And they're bringing, typically terabytes, some talking to us about bringing petabytes of data across file data into Azure at no cost. So again, our approach, we are looking at really working with larger organizations, sort of petabyte scale workloads is our focus. And the Analysis First Migration Program is really designed for that 500 plus terabyte kind of organization. But great momentum and just tremendous partnership, and can't thank you enough for your advocacy and enthusiasm, Karl. It's been great.
No worries. And Darren, you hit a really important point there. The Analysis First has just been huge for our joint customers that we're working with in this program, is when we just talking about any to any migration, like to unlike migration. The fantastic thing that Komprise gives people the opportunity to do is to right size and to move data to the appropriate price performance tier and appropriate price performance platform. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that customer set look at their data and really start to analyze, do I need to move all of this to that same high performance NAS in cloud service? Or can I move a portion of this data to lesser expensive object storage? And that flexibility that they gain with Komprise is just amazing, and it's really winning people over. And that's what we want to see. We want to see folks happy and managing their price performance needs appropriately. And that is impossible without the Analysis First.
Yeah, that's a great summary. I mean, especially in this economy, being able to make the right investment decisions and given the growth that we're seeing in file data, unstructured data, it's coming from everywhere. It's piling up at the edge. You just can't do things the way you used to do. You have to rethink your overall strategy, and that's where I think the analysis really brings that to bear. So let's bring you into the conversation, Paul. You've been in the background, and you have a lot to say about this topic too. So why don't we have you kind of take us through Komprise Hypertransfer for elastic data migration?
Very good. Thanks, Darren, and thanks for all the introduction, Karl. You've set this up very well for me. Now, Hypertransfer is an enhancement to the Komprise elastic data migration that Karl's been mentioning. Elastic data migration is the core migration feature in the Komprise platform. It allows you to migrate files from one area to another, wherever you need to. The most common use case we see is people need to evacuate an older file server get into a new one. But what we're starting to see is, as Karl mentioned, people need to get files from on-prem now up into the cloud, where they're migrating their workloads. Now, you're going to get a little bonus here. Komprise did a webinar a few months ago about WAN migrations in general. And I'm going to now give you a pretty quick synopsis of that webinar. So you're getting 2 webinars in one here. This is going to be very quick. There's a link to the actual recording to this over in the attachment section, so you can review this at your leisure. But for any WAN migration, there's a number of steps that we recommend that you should follow. And then once I review this, we'll dive into the hypertransfer part of the elastic data migration that makes these migrations so much faster than ever before. So if you're going to prepare yourself for a cloud migration, you're going to think about what files do I need to get up into the cloud? So basically, you're going to need to have a plan. Obviously, you're all doing this already, preaching to the choir, but you need to know what you're going to do, who's going to do it, how's it going to happen, when is it going to happen, what are my dates involved. So make sure you plan everything out. The rest of the little slides in this synopsis of the webinar are building out that plan. So for example, first you have to know, where is the data that I want to migrate, and where do I want to migrate it to? Obviously, defining your sources and targets is key. If you're migrating off your on-premises, there may be some rules and regulations you should think about. Obviously, these are within your enterprise. This varies by industry, varies by market and segment. But we just want to remind you, things like Sarbanes-Oxley may come into play, or if you're migrating European data, GDPR may come into play, HIPAA, and other regulations for PII and PCI, PHI. Keep in mind all those things when you're migrating the data, because you may be crossing boundaries now, which you hadn't before when you were migrating all behind your premises, behind your firewalls. This slide, data discovery, speaks to that analysis that Darren mentioned and that Karl latched on as well. With the Komprise platform, everything starts with analysis. So even a migration project, it's best if you understand your data first. So with data discovery, with analysis, you can get more insights into your data. We give you a centralized index, an ability to search across all the data, across all the silos. We call it a global file index. You can find what data might be subject to certain governance rules or regulations. You can identify and maybe even first archive orphan data or cold data. And now you're entering the realm of what we would call a smart data migration. Instead of migrating all the files to a new location, some of them may be more primed for tiering. Some of them may be more primed for eventual deletion, confining and deleting. So by right-sizing the data, as we talked about, you can obviously impact the efficiency of your migration. If you don't have analysis, you're a little bit flying blind, and you may not be able to make the right decisions. You may be doing an entire lift and shift when you don't need to. So definitely analyzing first gives you insights and ability and visibility into the data before you start any actual data transfers. Next, obviously you're thinking about going from on-prem into the cloud. In our minds, it seems very straightforward. I have stuff on-prem, I'm going to send it up into the cloud. It should be very straightforward. Of course, as we all know, the topology is not that straightforward. There's a lot of pieces of equipment in the way. You've got firewalls, you've got routers, switches. Each of these incur, you see these yield signs, delays, and latencies. And then you get out to your ISP, and now you're going over the internet into the cloud. Latency there is tremendous. Behind your firewall, you're looking at single-digit millisecond latencies. Once you're beyond the firewall, you're looking at tens, even hundreds of milliseconds latency. Something you might not consider, but obviously it's impacting the performance of your migration. And if you're trying to get millions or even billions of files from behind your firewalls up into the cloud, it's going to be severely impacted. And actually, this is where Komprise Hypertransfer can really help. And we'll dive into that in a little bit. Finally, before you pull the trigger, we always recommend test. There's an old adage. I used to work in systems for flight controls. Test what you fly what you test. So before you do a migration, do a test. Make sure that the source is capable of supplying the data fast enough. Make sure the destination can receive the data quickly enough. Make sure your connection between the source and destination is fast and that it's bidirectional. We've had customers find out that they had hysteresis in their routing, and that incurred extra delays that were not necessary, and actually they weren't even aware of them. And by doing these tests, you can uncover issues. Komprise also can help with a service we call ACE. It's an ACE up your sleeve, the assessment of the customer environment. This is a free service that Komprise can provide. It's a tool that we run in your environment outside of the Komprise platform, and it can analyze the behavior and the performance of accessing your source file servers, trying to read from them, trying to write data to your destinations, measuring latencies and the round trip times. This has been an invaluable tool in dozens of customers, even before Komprise has started doing any migration. We can help them see things that they didn't know existed in their environment. A lot of times networks just grow organically over time, and certain teams come in, certain teams go. Not everyone has a full picture of everything. The ACE tool can help give you that visibility into the environment even before Komprise gets involved.
I think that's a really important point, Paul. I mean, I think we're here to talk about data migration, but one of the learnings we've had in the last year is it's really knowing your data is really important, but also knowing your topology, knowing what you need to know before you go to avoid the finger pointing and issues that might happen later. I'm wondering, Karl, are you seeing that, like where people might have thought file migration was easier than it really is? And we'll talk about chatty protocols and things like that in a minute, but any things you've seen in working with customers?
Yeah. So I mean, boy, Paul really hit the nail on the head here. ACE has been phenomenal for customers, and the fact that Komprise built this tool and provided it has been huge. Not only does WAN offer a challenge, but you're going to be moving content from a platform that is in use during production. So understanding what the headroom is, what is the availability to copy data from that platform is a really important thing to be able to understand. So I cannot thank you guys enough for the work you've done and the devotion to helping customers to move quickly, efficiently, and safely. So yeah, I have really nothing to add other than amplifying what's been said.
ACE, assess your environment, important point. So let's go into Hypertransfer, Paul, and talk about really more of the core product elements of Komprise.
Absolutely. So just to wrap up, these steps everyone should consider when you're doing a cloud migration project. It's kind of the baseline foundational work. Can't take any shortcuts here. Got to follow the process. When you're actually ready to do the migration, now Komprise Hypertransfer can help accelerate, we're calling it turbocharging your migration. Hypertransfer helps when you're migrating file data from behind your firewall, from on-premises storage, up into the cloud. And as I mentioned, we're really working against that high latency that you get when you're using the internet to get up into the cloud. We've got hundreds of customers who are doing this, as Darren mentioned. We have seen them struggle. Migrations generally tend to be mission critical activities. The IT teams in charge are under huge pressure to get these done quickly and on schedule and on time when they have end users who are waiting for the data to end up in the right places. So they're highly stressed, and they've got lots of data, lots of files that they need to migrate. In certain cases, even billions of files. When the files are SMB, sometimes they're very, very small. We've seen actually workloads from, say, EDA and other industries where the workload is predominantly many small files, but then there are some large files that actually consume most of the space. But when you're transferring files and you're migrating, you've got to get all of them there. And so all of these small files incur an overhead that is just killing the performance when you're going round trip up through the cloud. That high latency WAN connectivity is something that people just kind of glitz over in their mind. One detail about SMB that a lot of people are not aware of is that the protocol itself is what we call very chatty. It incurs a lot of back and forth handshakes, acknowledgements in the protocol itself, which when you're behind your firewall and you've got single-digit millisecond latency, it doesn't matter if there are 15, 20, 30 messages going back and forth to manage one file transfer. You now do that same level of chattiness over 150 or 200 millisecond latency WAN connection, the performance just dies, and customers are not aware that this is happening. And this was the main bottleneck that Komprise can help with. We can't help with reducing the number of files. We can't help with the types of files you have. You've got to migrate what you've got. What Komprise has done is to reduce the chattiness of SMB by actually introducing our own proprietary protocol over the WAN. So here's a pictorial image of what's going on when you have deployed Komprise and now want to use it for migrating files. Up at the top, kind of ghosted, is your Komprise director. This is your user interface administrative console. This is where you set up all your migrations, configure them, and then monitor them once they're running. The actual work is done by Komprise appliances that we call observers, and in cases where you have SMB, Windows proxies, they're connected in a Komprise grid, and you see that in the center of the highlighted area. These run on premises, behind your firewalls, very close to your source storage. So over on the left, you see the source filers. These are where you're storing your files. These are the data that you want to migrate up to the cloud. The Komprise grid is installed and runs very close to the storage so that it can read very quickly from those systems. And now you're going to want to migrate to the right up into the cloud, say Azure Files or Azure NetApp Files, or perhaps you've got another flavor of cloud you want to use. You can see that red arrow. The SMB protocol over the WAN is extremely chatty, and you're going to just get bogged down. It's like driving your Ferrari off the road, the racetrack, onto the beach. And when you're driving through sand, it's just not going to perform. And this is the area where Komprise can really help. Komprise Hypertransfer optimizes that channel over the WAN. We actually set up a dedicated channel with a proprietary protocol. It's not using SMB anymore. It's removing that chattiness and optimizing use of that very slow channel. We did some lab tests. Again, your mileage may differ. I saw a question on how long it would take to migrate X amount of data from Y to Z. It all depends on how much X, how much Y, where is Z, your environment, your storage capacity, your storage usage, the environment, the network capability, the network bandwidth, the network availability, all of those come into factor. So it's very hard for Komprise to say with any definitiveness how fast things can go. But in our lab, as you can see, we measured against Robocopy, probably the most common freeware tool for migrating files. We were 25x faster than Robocopy for that first baseline copy, getting all the data from behind the firewall on premises up into the cloud. And then for each subsequent iteration, we were about 22x faster. Now, of course, we run subsequent iterations because you're generally migrating a live file system. You've got end users using the file system. Meanwhile, you're trying to migrate it up to the cloud. End users are making changes. They're adding files, changing files, modifying files, deleting files, directories the same. So we run multiple iterations to catch all those changes while your customers are still using those files. One thing to note, when Komprise is doing our migrations, we always do checksums to validate the integrity of the file. So when we're reading the file from your source storage, we perform a checksum. We send the file up to the destination. After it's been written on the destination, we read it from the destination. So as it's been stored, calculate another checksum and compare that checksum with the source checksum. If it doesn't match, we delete the file from the destination. So with Komprise, any file that's landed on your destination is guaranteed to be, the integrity is guaranteed. It's the same file that was sent from the source. If it doesn't match, it's not there. Robocopy doesn't do this by default. So that 25x faster that you're seeing is Komprise also doing that integrity checksum validation that Robocopy is not performing. So something to keep in mind, you're not only getting the speed up from Komprise, but you're getting the peace of mind that Komprise is validating the transfers as they go. So again, going back to the picture, you can see that red arrow over the WAN has now been optimized. It's now green, it's fast. There's a dedicated channel that Komprise sets up. And this is where this is what we call the hypertransfer part of the elastic data migration. Now a little bit of nuts and bolts. How does this actually work? Well, Komprise will have you set up what are called zones. And a hypertransfer will occur between two zones. Now, when you deploy Komprise initially, you will get a default zone automatically. And all of your on-premises storage, all your on-premises Komprise appliances will automatically be added to the default zone. So all you need to do is decide where you're going to migrate to in the cloud and define zones for those areas. You may be migrating to a single area, say Azure US East. You only need to create one zone. If you're going to be migrating from multiple on-premises sites to multiple different cloud regions, you might be using Azure and EMEA and Azure and APAC. You would set up different zones for those different Azure regions. Essentially, a zone is an area where there's very high connectivity within a zone, and then Komprise will migrate across zones using hypertransfer. So going back to the diagram, the way this looks, you've got this big oval on the left. This is your default zone. This is automatically set up by Komprise. You can see it comprises, no pun intended, your source file storage as well as the on-premises Komprise grid. This is automatically created by Komprise. All you need to do is define a new zone wherever you want to migrate to. So in this example, we want to migrate to Azure Files, and suppose it's sitting in Azure US East. We would create a zone and name it Azure US East. These zones are completely customer defined, and they live within Komprise. It's a Komprise artifact that we use in our migrations. So now let's take an example migration. Suppose you've got a NetApp on-prem. It will already be in the default zone, and you want to now migrate the data up to Azure Files in the cloud. As I mentioned, you would create a new zone, Azure US East. You would assign your Azure file storage to that zone, and then you'll need a Komprise appliance also in that zone to be the recipient of the hypertransfer channel. And so you'll deploy what we call a Windows proxy in the Azure region, Azure US East, and also assign it to that zone. That's all you need to do. After that, everything is as normal. You configure a Komprise migration as usual. Under the covers, the Komprise migration engine will realize the source, the NetApp, is in the default zone. The intended destination, the Azure Files, is in a different zone, and it will build and set up that dedicated hypertransfer channel between the zones. Pictorially, you've got your default zone with your NetApp filer on premises. You're going to be sending files up to Azure Files in the cloud. The hypertransfer channel is set up between those two zones. It's just that simple. And from here, I'm going to give you a demonstration of what that looks like using a live Komprise demonstration environment.
So as you're doing that, Paul, there are a couple of questions. You addressed the one about data transfer, how long it'll take to move from here to here with 50 terabytes of data. I think it's just a lot of variability. So I think that one was answered. Another question was about getting in touch with Komprise, and we're definitely following up and making sure, anyone who does reach out, we want to be as responsive as possible. So you're probably getting an email right now from our team. But yeah, I do encourage you. There are some questions about other tools, and maybe you can hit on that as you're demonstrating some of the differentiators as you go along, Paul.
Absolutely. And again, when you're doing a Komprise migration, the analysis, the visibility is the foremost differentiation that we offer over a lot of our competitors, knowing your data first. And I'll give you a preview of that as we go through this demonstration. But first, when I want to set up a hypertransfer, I made up my plan. I know I want to migrate from NetApp on premises up to Azure files in the cloud. I know I'm going to need a zone up in the cloud. So I've gone ahead and I defined a new zone. And then I know I need a Komprise Windows proxy in that zone. So I've already created that here. It's called Comp Proxy Azure US East 1. And you can see the zone that it's in is this Azure US East 1 zone. Now, like normal in Komprise, you point Komprise to the storages. Here's my corporate NetApp that I'm going to migrate from. It's on premises. Happens to be in a NetApp 8 cluster. You can see it's by default already in the default zone. I've already added also my Corp Azure Files server. It's in Azure Files, and it's sitting in the Azure US East 1 zone. So when I added Corp Azure to Komprise, I made sure to put it in the correct zone. So now I've got my storage in this zone, and I've got a Windows proxy in that zone. From here on, it's very simple and straightforward to set up a migration. This is standard Komprise Elastic Data Migration. I would use the wizard and say I want to migrate from my corporate NetApp, say this share, and I'm going to now my Azure files, where I've already set up the destination share. Komprise will warn me if there's any inconsistencies between the two filers, if there's any incompatibilities. So Komprise will warn me. In certain cases, I may have choices. In this case, I don't have any choices, but I can get more information from the supporting documentation. I can give it a name if I want. I'll leave it as the default. The default is the share name I'm migrating from. There are certain options I can set. Notice validate data transfer is an option here. By default, Komprise will always perform those checksums and ensure the data integrity as we migrate. But if you want to improve performance, you could turn off this feature. You may trust that all the file system calls, all the Azure files calls in the cloud are going to work properly. They should. They're built to. Therefore, you can save some time. Komprise won't perform the checksums, and you'll get faster performance even that way. Finally, I review my migration, check the name, check the source, check the destination, all the settings are right, and then I go. The Komprise interface lets you monitor all the migrations you've got going. You'll get a table here of all your migrations. You can filter the view of them just to the ones you're interested in. At any particular point in time, we're showing you how much we've processed, how long it's been running, what's the current transfer rates. And for more details, you can click on the name of the migration. We give you a lot of information here. If there were any errors, you would get a card up here telling you what they were and what you could do to address them. We summarize the source and destination, how much data we've seen on the source, how much data is migrating over to the destination. And then you'll see information about the migration itself, each iteration as it proceeds, how far along it's gone, how long it takes, how much data we've migrated over, how fast it's going, changes copied, very much detail on exactly what's being copied over, what was scanned on the source, etc. Any errors, that all comes in. So this is standard Elastic Data Migration interface. Lets you monitor your migrations at a very high level and to also great detail. Meanwhile, hypertransfer is going on in the background, and we'll be seeing amazing high performance. We had one customer, frankly, they were skeptical when we told them about Komprise Elastic Data Migration. Their champion on their side was a very hard nut to crack, as we would say. Skeptical with us. was looking at the performance before we turned on Hypertransfer, and it was abysmal. We needed to run the ACE tool in their environment. We found some issues. He still was not happy with the performance. They were going up to the cloud. We turned on Hypertransfer. He sent an email the next day with a graph, and the performance had been like this. And then after Hypertransfer, it went like this. And his email had a snapshot of that graph, and one word in the email said, "Wow." And so that was just amazing. To turn a skeptic into a champion through this performance increase was just, it's so validating as a product manager to see your product actually helping the customer in ways that they hadn't dreamed were possible. So it's taking a step back. Again, the question was, why would you choose Komprise over, say, other competitive tools? I mentioned the analysis. Let me just give you a quick view of some of the analytics that Komprise can provide you. There's more that we could dive into at a later webinar. But as soon as you have Komprise looking at your shares, Komprise is digging in and very quickly giving you a view of the age ranges across your data. This is what we call our data donut. And we'll show you for the shares that you're looking at, how much of the data is hot, say how much has been accessed within the last month, how much of it is warm, say accessed within the last 1 to 3 months. And as you can see, as you go around the wheel, data gets colder and colder. Very clearly and easily with the blue areas, you can see how much of your data is technically cold, how much data hasn't been accessed in more than 3 years. We give you percentages, we give you file amounts. So this already gives you visibility into data that our customers say that it's very hard for them to get, especially across all of their data platforms, all their storage platforms. This is a single pane of glass view across your NetApps, your Isilons, all your on-prem storage, your Windows servers, whatever you've got. Komprise has pointed at it. We'll give you information about it. But that's not all. On the usage tab, we'll start to break down information about the data you've got. So this is all about, again, the analysis and knowing what kind of data you have. We'll show you how much space is consumed by different file types. This is a demo. Okay, I don't have 9 petabytes of data that I can play with. The product is real, the data is simulated, but in this case, we're showing you we can find by extensions and then categorizing those files into different types. And in this case, videos are making the predominant capacity usage in this environment. And you can even see the age ranges of those particular types of files. Again, a small anecdote, we had a customer turned on Komprise, was looking at certain shares, and videos came up to the top. And they were thinking, we don't deal with videos. Why is video so high? They went further down and they found some top owners. They started to ask those owners about the files, and they found out that there was a particular employee who was storing all the Game of Thrones videos on corporate storage. So little HR intervention, please don't do that. They recovered some space, which was great, and also helped find some infractions to corporate policy. So they were very thankful for us for uncovering an issue that they didn't even know existed. We can show you your file distribution by size and how much space each size range is consuming. So in this case, you can see larger files consume the majority of the space. But very interestingly, if you look at these graphs by the number of files, it's predominantly small files that are the highest number. So this is very useful information when you're trying to do a migration. You need to know, okay, there's actually a lot of these small files. Small files are the killer for performance. It sets your expectations for the kind of migrations you would do. It can also help you when you're tiering data. Often when you're tiering data, you might be faced with a situation where your storage is reaching some capacity. You want to get some cold data up into the cloud tiered where it's cheaper. You can tier the larger files first, bang for the buck. If you tier those larger files first, you're going to save much more capacity sooner rather than wasting your time tiering small files. And you can set parameters inside Komprise. Komprise, again, is a platform. Once you know your data, you can mobilize it correctly. Migration is one of the great mobilization capabilities we have, but you can also mobilize by tiering. And by setting up certain policies, you could say, I want to tier files of 100 meg and greater first, of a certain age, and get those files up into the cloud, reclaim space on your storage.
I love that, Paul. And even for data, that has been migrated to and will remain in cloud storage, this same pattern will occur over time, right? I mean, even if you have made those intelligent tiering moves, you have to think of tiering as a continuous process, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, there's huge value to retaining and using Komprise post migration as well. This is just a continuous life cycle.
Thank you, Karl. That's exactly where we were going, and it's very nice to have someone not Komprise point this out. Once
It's
you have
true.
migrated, once you migrated your data to the cloud, you want to point Komprise at it and start managing that cloud data as well. We can show you the same analytics. You can then start managing it in the same way as if it were your on-prem data. So all of this usage analytics is available to you. These are sort of what we call aggregate information. For example, you can't see the actual files here for these shares, but we give you aggregate information so you can make decisions on what you might do with the data. We have another feature which we call deep analytics. I don't want to dive into too much in this call, but it gives you the ability to search for very specific files using a very Amazon-like interface. You set filters on, for example, where do I want to search these particular filers or this particular share on the Atlanta site. I also want to look for files of, say, certain extensions, or I can look for files of certain types. This ability to narrow down a search to find just a specific set of files gives you an amazing capability, not only to see the aggregate result of that query. Oh, I found 11 terabytes of data. It's 126K files. I can see those exact files. So in the user interface, obviously, you don't want to look at 126,000 files. We'll show you a subset here, I think 1,000 files. You can download a CSV with up to 10,000 files. And if you want all the files, you can use an API that we've got and a script. It will stream all those files down, and then you have that exact data set. You can carve it up by user and hand it out and saying, show back, look, here's all the files you're using. Here's how much space you're using. Can you help us? We had another anecdote. We had a customer do this. They wanted to find all their files that were older than 7 years. This was an old organization, more than 50 years old. Turns out they had 47 million files that were in this category. And they used our API and got the file names of every single one of those files and then used it to do show back with their end customers. So it's very powerful, this deep analytics case. Even more beyond that, once you find certain data sets, you can then act on those data sets. You can then say, Komprise, I want you to migrate that data set. I want you to tier that data set. I want you to copy that data set so that another team over in another region can use that data. So you can mobilize very, very specific data sets that you find within your silos using Komprise Deep Analytics.
Good stuff, Paul. You've shown us a lot in a short amount of time. I like your last point about it's analyze and mobilize. So it's not just seeing something, but actually being able to take action on it and automate. I do have a bunch of questions for you guys. I want to just throw some in, and kind of we can wrap from there. I know we're kind of on the edge of our time, but let me just take you back to a final thought here, or a few questions. First of all, we talked about the advantages of an analysis-first approach, and that's not just knowing your data, but also knowing everything about the environment that you're currently in and you're moving to. So your overall topology, super important. I like this quote from a recent GigaOM radar on data migration that I think really also hits on a differentiator that hopefully came out in the demo. Migration-only solutions are still relevant for limited use cases, but ultimately, organizations need to consider data migration as a broader discipline under data management initiatives, right? So look at the bigger picture, not just a one and done, lift and shift kind of situation. Super important point. Karl, you're nodding and waving, so you clearly agree.
Amen. Amen. Absolutely. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity with the move to public cloud. And we saw some of this in the when server virtualization was broadly adopted. There was some right sizing that happened there, reducing core counts and reducing RAM allocated to servers, to virtual servers. But this is an even bigger opportunity, migration to cloud. So I love that. That's the first time I've seen that GigaOM quote, and it couldn't be more spot on.
Awesome. So let me throw a few questions at you guys, and also let people know the assets are in. You can go and get them right in BrightTalk, but you can also go to komprise.com/hypertransfer, and also we have user guides online. You can go learn more about the Azure Migration Program and Komprise for Azure on these two URLs. So leave those up there, and then throw a few questions at you guys. First, maybe a couple of that are a little more hands-on to what you showed, Paul. So the first one is about Komprise zones. Do they need to be created for each cloud filer? What can you tell us about zone setup?
Okay, great question. Actually, you don't need to create a zone for each cloud filer. What you should do is create a zone for each region where you will have cloud filers. So for example, that's why I was using the example of Azure US East. That is a region where Azure has very great interconnectivity within that region. So if you have multiple cloud filers inside that region, you only need one zone defined for that entire region. If you have now another region, say Azure APAC, where you want to also migrate, you would want a different zone there. So multiple filers can obviously share the same zone. It's really just about what's the interconnectivity in that zone.
Gotcha. Awesome. All right, let me ask you this one, Karl, because I think this is probably a hot topic for organizations that they've decided on Azure. They just haven't necessarily decided on, which tier, which type. So the question is, if we're a NetApp customer, when do I go to Azure NetApp files versus Azure files? And you might as well put in Azure Blob in there too. Like, how does the customer think about those choices?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one we get all the time. So we do have some great documentation available, and head out to your favorite search engine and look for Azure NetApp files, Azure Blob comparison. We've got a great document. It really comes down to features and functionality needed. Are there versions of protocol that you need that are not supported by one of those services that are by the other? I'll give you a great example. Azure NetApp Files offers access to the same volume simultaneously through SMB protocol and NFS protocol. That is not something that Azure Files does. You need the advanced snapshotting capabilities that NetApp provides. Well, clearly you will remain a NetApp customer and adopt Azure NetApp Files. Blob storage is fantastic for large volumes of data. You now have to make a shift to REST protocol access using gets and puts to read and write those files, or leverage the NFS v3 protocol that we have available. So understanding the technical differences, looking at that comparison is a great place to start. And we also do outline in there the performance differences between the two. The Azure NetApp File Service is screaming fast performance, sub-millisecond access times. Hundreds of thousands of reads and writes per second. Really, it's just understanding the platform capabilities, mapping that to your needs, and then choosing the right one again for that price performance blend that's best for your business.
That makes sense. And I got a follow on that I think ties into that answer for you, Paul, on, with Komprise, once I've migrated my file data to the cloud, can Komprise manage that data? And I think if you think about a customers that, Karl just talked about choice. If you do decide on Azure NetApp files, and then you maybe want to have some files in Azure files and then some in Blob, how does Komprise help in that overall kind of ongoing data management, data lifecycle management?
Yeah, once you've got your files up in either Azure Files or Azure NetApp Files, it's just file storage to us, and that's what we help manage, unstructured data. So you just point Komprise at it, and you can bring to bear all the Komprise capabilities from the platform on those files as well. It just so happens they're in the cloud, still unstructured data that will help you manage.
Do you guys talk to, maybe last question, some customers, they talk about not getting locked in and kind of back to choice. Are there conversations you have, Karl, with your customers about that? Like how to think about, hey, I'm multi-storage, I'm multi-cloud. How does Microsoft answer that question? Because sometimes you might think, oh, it's got to all be in one or all be in ours as one vendor. But how are you approaching the choice question?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's what is what is the best thing for that application. We are, I think, very aware of the fact, and big supporters of the fact that hybrid cloud, multi-cloud will absolutely continue. There are certain services that are only available in an on-premise environment or in another public cloud. So, having a data estate that spans multiple environments and multiple platforms is going to be a reality going forward. We'd love to have everything, all of a customer's applications and workloads on Azure. That'd be fantastic, but it may not be the best thing based on remote sites that are involved, network connectivity, sensitivity of data. There's a ton of reasons why that is not possible, or service unavailability. So being able to govern your data across that multi-cloud, on-premises and public cloud estate is incredibly important. And that's yet another reason to really, really look for tooling like we've seen today that offers visibility across multiple locations.
Awesome. That's a great way to summarize. Let me give you, Karl, the last word on the program. If I'm a customer just thinking about Azure, file migration, what's the best way to move forward?
Yeah, so we've made it as easy as possible. There are no forms to fill out. You send an email to azure@komprise.com and stating the details around your project, and you'll get a contact touch point really quickly. Or you can head to the Azure Marketplace, look for the Komprise sponsored by Azure offer, click contact me, and you're off to the races really, really quickly. So we've made it easy, and it's also complementary to other programs like the Azure Migration and Modernization Program that help customers move their virtual machines, their databases, or applications to containerized deployments in Azure. It's a great way to combine moving the application tier or database tier along with the unstructured data. These are really complementary and make it as easy as possible for customers to shift workloads to Azure.
Fantastic. That's a super helpful summary. All right, guys, I really enjoyed talking to you both. And, thanks everyone for attending. Lots of good questions. You can reach out to us as follow-ups, and, we'll put this out on our YouTube channel. And, Karl, again, thank you for a fantastic partnership. We really appreciate your time and enjoy working with you.
Likewise. Thank you, guys. We couldn't do this without you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you in the cloud or on-prem or wherever you want to be. We'll be there for you. Thank you.
Thank you.